The next speaker is Katie Duke. Katie is working also in Hull, in the Deep. She's a curator there, and she's going to talk about the Big Fish campaign.
Okay, right. Good morning, everybody. My name's Katie, and I'm also from the Deep, like Andrew. Thank you very much for allowing me to give you this presentation today. It's on the Big Fish campaign, which is something that's been running in the UK for a few years now. And it was started off the back of the fact that every time we got together at our annual conference, we started whinging at each other about just how many pet fish we were being offered from the hobbyist community. Quite often we would get phone calls, probably on a weekly basis, or even emails, or even sometimes the bucket arrived at the reception desk of a fish, an unwanted pet fish that had outgrown its home tank. So back in 2002, Dr. Peter Burgess started a survey. It was just a very brief survey, but it was to gather a sort of a snapshot of potentially what this issue was. And it was quite revealing, really. Just over a 3-month period, 11 aquariums were offered 144 fish. Interestingly, they were all large-growing freshwater species. And we sort of came up with our top 10 list of species that were commonly offered. When asked, the public always said that the reason that they now had this problem was because that they didn't know. They just didn't know how big their pet fish was going to grow. So in 2006, the National Aquarium Workshop, our annual conference in the UK, took on this as an awareness-raising campaign, and we decided to try and gather a little bit more data on trends, this being a few years later. Interestingly, we saw a reduction in some species, such as the trendy species, which were piranha, but we were seeing a rise in other large-growing freshwater catfish species. What we also discovered was that very few of these fish being offered were able to be rehomed at public aquariums. Obviously, we're all full with the animals that our exhibits are designed for, and therefore we were slightly concerned because really where were these fish going and what was the effect of this? We also probably were only really seeing the tip of the iceberg because people coming and offering their fish to public aquariums were probably the people who cared. There were probably a very large number of fish that were potentially dying because they were just kept in a tank that was too small. They were maybe being killed or potentially even released. So really probably what we were seeing was just the tip of the iceberg. What we do know in the UK is that there are more tropical pet fish than any other pets. So that's cats, dogs, rabbits, hamsters, everything combined. 1 in 10 households have a fish tank with an estimated 20 to 65 million fish within those tanks. We also know from the Pet Food Manufacturers Association that fish keeping is a growing hobby rather than other pet populations which have remained stable over the last few years. Also, data from the Ornamental Aquatic Trades Association suggests that between 40 and 50 million fish are imported into the UK every year. Now, they don't have the statistics to break down just what percentage of these are the larger growing species, but that's an awful lot of fish. Where do they go? Now, as well as this being sort of a bit of an inconvenience for public aquariums, constantly being asked by members of the public, the real issue is actually that this is a massive welfare concern. These 2 pictures here just highlight some of the problems that you can see. The plec to the left of the screen there was in a tank that was so small that the only space it had left to grow was inside one of the tank ornaments, which got entrapped around its head. And again, this, I think it's a tiger shovel nose, was kept in a tank that was actually smaller than its entire body length. So the campaign was relaunched a couple of years ago by our Aquarium Working Group. We took this on, and we started off by hosting a meeting that was at Bristol Zoo, and we invited a variety of people, including the wholesalers, the retailers, fish rescue organisations, and also OATA, the Ornamental Aquatics Trade Association. We had some interesting discussions, and generally the people in that room were all in agreement that this was a problem. We obviously broke it down into the different aspects, the issue being that wholesalers are quite often removed from actually seeing the problem because they're separated by the retailers, but the types of fish that they're importing, such as Pangasius catfish, are often sold at very, very small rates onto the retailers. For example, you can buy, as a retailer, a Pangasius catfish at 60 pence, and you get a discount on this if you buy multi-buys off the wholesalers. So there were some issues there. There were also issues on the retailer side of things. Quite often, obviously, they were taking up the good offers from the wholesalers, but also there was the issue of them not labelling their fish properly. So when public went in to buy their fish, quite often not exactly the correct information was being given. And sometimes they were even being told, well, don't worry, because once your fish grows big, you can offer it to your public aquarium. And finally, there was the issue at the hobbyist end as well, because for some reason fish are not sort of treated with as much care as a pet cat or a pet dog, and people buy on impulse. They go in there, they don't do their homework or their research, and they just buy a fish based on how it looks in the pet shop. So as you can see, there are sort of issues on all levels. And while we can try and engage with all these different levels, there are added complications in that there are a number of online retailers, often unlicensed and quite often untraceable. They just sort of shut down. But when they're offering things at the cheapest price in the UK and, again, discounts, delivery is $14.95 for as many fish as you can order. It doesn't really help the situation. And also, that one just amazed me there too. You can buy a black-tip reef shark for £1,000 and get it delivered direct to your door. So there are these kind of complications that we're up against. Having said that, we have had an amazing amount of support, which is fantastic. We now have a number of retailers on board. As I said, this is mainly a freshwater issue. The marine trade seems to be more expensive, and therefore you generally get people who have better setups and have thought their process through a little bit more. So really the problem species very much lies in the freshwater side of things. We do have support from the major retailer in the UK, which is Pets at Home, and they have 320 stores, which now all proudly support us, showing this sign, and they also don't stock the species that are causing the issues. As aquariums, we decided that the one thing that we are good at is awareness raising, because we get, in the UK, 12.7 million visitors between us all, and that's our potential reach. So we decided to run the awareness raising campaign and encourage retail participation and basically speak to the people on the floor and try and get people to think a little bit more about their tanks at home and how they go about selecting fish that will live quite happily within their fish tanks. What we also wanted to do is ensure that we encouraged fish keeping as a hobby. This is not an anti-fish keeping campaign at all. This was very much about sensible species selection to avoid problems later down the line. So we came up with a poster. Again, the poster doesn't say you can't have one of these fish. The poster is saying, think about it. Please think about how big this fish is going to get. What we wanted to do was put a 80 centimetre, 1 metre sized fish into perspective and try and show them how big a tank they would need. And the average home fish tank is probably not big enough for most of these species. This year we've had 22 aquariums take part. Now, we don't really have a budget for this campaign, so everybody is doing what they can within their own facility, whether that's just displaying posters or whether producing small displays. And we can see here a very nice display at Bristol Zoo. Johnny Rudd, the curator there, has actually made one wall look like a living room. He's put wallpaper on the walls and set in his fish tank there. But it's just a very good example of how people can share the message. We've also run a variety of activities. That's been everything from public talks to competitions and quizzes. And at the Deep, we had our paper mache catfish, and he was covered in pledges by children over the summer months who came in, had a little lesson about how to choose the right fish for your tank at home. And then they pledged to never buy a fish that they didn't know how big it would grow. So there's been various ways that we've all sort of tried to spread the word. Last year we also had great support from Aquatics Live, which is one of the major hobbyist shows in the UK. It's down in London, and again, thankfully, we had great support from the organisers of this show, who felt that the Big Fish campaign was something that was quite important, and they gave us a stand free of charge. They also printed us out these wonderful boards at the back so that we had a really good display. So that was fantastic for our awareness raising. We've also had an awful lot of support through UK press, through trade magazines, and also through hobbyist magazines as well. And we had some great success with getting on The One Show, which is a national TV show hosted sort of prime time, and that focused on the issues of fish that grow too big for your average home tank. We have a website, and this is hosted by one of our keen retailers, Wharf Aquatics. Again, we were sort of building up on the success of the website, but we are getting a good amount of visitors to the website. We also use this as a great place to store all our information, so any articles that we get and anything that we publish, we make sure that it's on this website for people to be able to have a look at or download. We also have a social media page. We have over 800 likes on Facebook, and this is going well, and it's a great way to really engage with people. We also do Twitter, but not as much as we do Facebook. We've had a great amount of support as well from fish forums, and this year we contacted another 26 hobbyist groups to see whether they would support us as well. But again, a lot of these groups are very supportive and are quite happily putting our poster and our logo on their website. So future plans, really. We are continuing to raise awareness. We will continue to do displays within our aquariums, and next year we'd also like to repeat our data recording just to see whether we're getting any differences or changing trends amongst the species. We'd like to sort of continue the work, but as I say, we don't really have a large budget, so maybe that's one thing that the group of people who work on this need to go out and look for next year. It's very much driven by a small group of individuals from different aquariums within the UK who meet once a year, set our goals, and then sort of divide up the jobs and go out there and try and sort of encourage participation throughout the sort of the whole industry, really. We're very nearly there with our first wholesaler, which is fantastic. Unfortunately, I am not able to say who that wholesaler is, but we do almost now have one wholesaler signed up to this who is now not going to import Pangasius and Pacu, which would be fantastic. We'll continue promotion, and we want to try and get more aquariums involved as well. And one way we're doing that is by running the Big Fish campaign roadshow. Meet Buster. Buster is our soft toy, life-size red-tailed catfish, and he is going on tour. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here this week with us. He was last seen at the National Aquarium Conference at the weekend, and I think he's still recovering, so unfortunately he couldn't make it. But Buster is a great tool, and one thing that we found is he's very useful for is enabling people to fully see the size of a 1 meter long catfish. They can visualize it that way, but what they can't visualize it is width and depth, and really when you give them something like this, the penny drops that actually this is a very large fish and probably won't fit in the tank that they've got. So he's with great thanks to Southern Counties Catfish Rescue, who actually provided us with some funds to get him made. So he's on tour, and we have a few display materials that he's going on tour with around the UK at the moment. But we would really like to see whether he could have a foreign holiday next year. And so if there is anybody who is willing to take on Buster and the Big Fish campaign materials for a week, we would be delighted to hear from you. So please, if you can support us in any way, whether that's hosting Buster or whether that's just linking to us from your website or liking us on Facebook, then please do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kate. Very nice project. Are there any questions? Sweet this morning, isn't it? Again, I have a question for you. Do you think it really has an effect? Do you find it back already if it has an effect? And another question is, do you think that the government also can do something about it?
Yes, it's difficult to know at the moment whether it's having an effect. There are definitely changing trends, and it depends on what is popular as a sort of species in the pet shop. We're finding that actually now there's an increasing trend of freshwater turtles coming in, and that's what we're being asked to house more often. But our survey next year will show that. So it will be interesting. I think it's more long term to see how the trends will work. We did talk about government level changes, and the issue with this is that it's very difficult. We thought about the Dangerous Wild Animal Act, which means that potentially we could get some species listed, but unless an animal is able to kill you, they won't list it on the Dangerous Wild Animal Act. And also this campaign is not about banning people from keeping fish, because there are a lot of people who have very large aquariums that are very capable of looking after some of these large species. And obviously we all have large species within our facility as well. So what we wanted to do was just encourage more responsible fish selection and maybe take away some of the very large species from a lot of pet shops that they have on stock, so that they could order them in if somebody specifically asked and somebody specifically had the tank that could care for them, but just take them away from the general public so that they could replace them with species that would be quite happy to live in your average home fish tank for its entire life.
Okay.
Most of these animals, when they're getting big, are potentially dangerous because of spines or teeth.
Yeah.
And would it be possible maybe that the regulation lists them as a potentially
dangerous wild animal?
Big, and this would force people to have permits to hold them. That this regulation has been set up in France.
Yeah.
With lots of trouble, but also lots of solutions.
Absolutely, and that would be the ideal in a lot of situations, would be to get certain species listed on the Dangerous Wild Animal Act. Unfortunately, in the UK at the moment, we're going through a phase whereby there are more animals coming off the Dangerous Wild Animal Act than are going on it, through their lack of funds to police it, I think. So really, we are struggling, and we're sort of behind everybody else in the queue. I know that a lot of reptile organisations are trying also to get more animals onto the Dangerous Wild Animal list, and so we're sort of behind them in the queue, really. But that would be a very long process. What we wanted to do was try and act now, really, and just do something. So awareness raising is something that we can do now, but potentially in the future, maybe that would be the ideal solution.
Is it happening more in Europe, in other aquaria, or in other countries that you have these lists, these negative or positive lists, that you're not allowed to keep certain animals, especially aquatic animals? Is that happening?
I mean, certainly we have something to do, but these positive or negative lists bear a great danger. We have this discussion in Germany for a very long time for reptiles, and we really wonder in some regions which animals appear on these dangerous animals lists, going down to small little dendrobacids and things like this, regarded as poisonous animals and to be dangerous not to be kept. So if the wrong people get a legislation on doing these lists, and very often they are talking to these animal protectors, So you will have everything except from little rabbits on that list. So I think it's really the way to teach people to be sensible when they go to the pet shop. It's the better way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Normally by legislation, the shops they have the duty to label the fish correctly. They don't do this.
Exactly.
They gases as mini sharks, which is a very attractive name and makes people buy it. So you have to stop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any countries that want to comment? No? Okay, thank you, Katie.